So just following on from that introduction then, and making sure that we fully understand what UK residence means. So if you are a UK resident, then you will be liable to the income tax regime on any income that you generate here in the UK and potentially around the world. Okay, so your worldwide income may be liable to income tax, but that would depend on your domicility. That's where we need to join the two together. UK residence means that any gains that we make are liable to capital gains tax, or certainly to the capital gains tax regime as well. And also, again, dependent on our domicility, worldwide gains may be liable to CGT. UK residence for inheritance tax means that, generally speaking, if we are UK residents, all our worldwide assets will actually be liable to IHT regime. If we're non-domiciled and we live here, then the rules are slightly different because only our UK assets will actually fall into scope. But the two, again, if residence and domicile when combined, will determine the exact rules that we will look at. UK residence coupled with UK domicile essentially means worldwide income, worldwide gains, worldwide assets will be liable to the UK tax system. It may, of course, be that other countries have eyes on the prize as well, and where there's any disputes, then whether or not there's a double taxation agreement in place may well determine the outcome of that. Where we've got a non-domicility, then your residence actually changes quite significantly and the complicated rules will come into play, and we're going to look at those a little bit later. But certainly UK Dom, UK Res, everything is in scope. So are we residents or not? That is the question that many of us would like to answer. And I think for 99.9% of the cases, it's pretty obvious whether we're a resident or not. And we don't need to go through any of what we're going to talk about now. However, in a globalised world, people live all over the place, multiple houses, multiple homes, multiple incomes from multiple countries. And in those circumstances, actually proving UK residence or not can actually be quite complicated. It is possible to have more than one residence in 1 year, but we'll keep it straightforward at this moment in time. So where it's not obvious whether we're a resident or not, we're going to need to go through a series of tests to help us establish definitively one way or the other whether we're in scope or not. And these tests, which come accumulated together, are known as the residency tests, may form up to 3 different parts, and then you go from 1 to 2 to 3 where you cannot prove that the previous test has been conclusive. So what we're going to do, if there's a doubt about our residence, is we're going to go through the residency test, and the first test we're going to do is one that's going to try and prove that we are not resident. If that is not definitive, if that cannot prove what it sets out to prove, we then move on to test 2. And test 2 will try to prove that we are resident. Hopefully that will be definitive, but if it's not, we'll need to go to test 3, which is almost like a penalty shootout really, the sufficient ties test, as complicated as anything in the whole exam book that we've got. Thankfully for us, probably not tested in any great detail in this exam. So in each test is completed in turn, you only move to the next if that one is inconclusive. If it proves to be conclusive, well then you have your answer as to whether you're resident or not. So here are essentially the 3 tests shown as an overview at this stage. So we've already established that the first test is trying to prove that you're not residents. And this is basically a series of questions asked. If you can answer yes to them, then you will automatically be not resident. If you can't, then you'll move on to the next test. The second test of automatic residence again is a series of questions. If you answer yes to these, then you'll be automatically resident. If you don't, then you'll move to the penalty shootout of the sufficient ties test. And the sufficient ties test will basically be dependent on whether or not you're arriving in the UK or leaving the UK. and even that is not as straightforward as it seems. So let's break these down then and have a look at the first of the residency test, which is about proving that we're not resident. So can we answer yes to these? Have we been in the UK for fewer than 16 days? Have we been in the UK for less than 46 days and not resident in the UK during the previous tax years? Do we work overseas and we're in the UK for fewer than 91 days, working in the UK for less than 31 days? That's straightforward, that. Generally speaking, if you answer yes to those, that will prove that you are not resident. If you can't answer yes to those, then on we go. We're going on to the next test. I'm sure you're thinking, do I need to remember all of these dates? Do I need to remember all of these actual rules? Well, there's nothing to say that you don't, but history will tell us that it's very, very unlikely that you'll get specific questions about any of these tests. So now we move on to the automatically residence test, and the same applies. We need to answer yes to these for this to prove to be definitive. Are we in the UK for 183 days or more in the tax year? So do we spend more time here than anywhere else? Because of course that's 6 months of the year. Do we have a home in the UK? There's very complex rules on this. Do we work in the UK? Likewise, it's nowhere near as straightforward as do you own property? Do you actually work here? There's all sorts of rules around living in hotels and owning a property and not living there, all sorts of things. Again, thankfully, beyond the scope of this exam. But if we do live here, if we do actually, we're here for more than 6 months, we do have a home here and we work in the UK, then that is going to prove that we are residents in the UK. If we can't answer yes to those, then on we go to the sufficient ties test, and we prepare for our minds to be blown. So here we have it, the sufficient ties test. We've arrived here because neither of the first two tests have proven to be definitive. And there's a general principle that will apply to this, that the longer time you spend in the UK, the more days, the less ties to the UK you will need to be resident. The less time you spend in the UK, the more ties that you're going to need to basically say that you are resident, which is kind of common sense when you think about it on that basis. So we're going to talk about 5 possible ties that we're going to need to go through. But we'll go through these on the backdrop of whether or not we are classified as a leaver or an arriver for the purpose of this test. Now, it's important for you to understand that a leaver is someone who has been resident in the UK for the past 3 years. An arriver is somebody who hasn't been resident in the UK during the past 3 years. So in theory, whilst it seems obvious that if you come into these shores you're an arriver, or if you're going away from these shores you're a leaver, it's actually a little bit more detailed than that, because you could essentially be resident in the UK, go and work abroad, come back to the UK and be classified as a leaver. So ultimately, yeah, it's complex, this. Will we need to know the full ins and outs of this? The basics only, please. And I think this actual overriding sufficient ties test explanation is probably more likely to be tested than the detail that follows.